transformation leads, somebody who's trying to drive transformation through their organization, or somebody who's just interested in the topic of change and how to lead change in an organization. I believe this is one of the underappreciated skills in today's professional world. We are expected to be comfortable with uncertainty. We are expected in our day-to-day roles to just know how to deal with change, know how to lead our teams through change without really needing any training, without really talking about it. And unfortunately, that's not true. Change is a subject in itself, and it's developing more and more now as we've got multiple generations in the workforce, right from the baby boomers to now the millennials and the centennials. We have to deal with all of these different ways of thinking, the aspects that influence the way different people or different generations think, at the same time trying to drive our organizations to an eventual goal, which is a common goal. So I usually use the analogy of crossing a river. A river which you could say that if your organization is in this state, then this is the current state, which is one side of the river, and then you want to take your organization to the other side, which is the other side of the river, and that is, let's say, the target state. Now, in order to go through that, there are various ways to do it. You could swim across, you could take a bridge, you could take a bridge walking, you could take a bridge in a car, you could take the bridge on a bike, which means you are driving it alone at a speed, or you could take it in a big truck where you're carrying a lot of people with you. So I use this analogy because I think it relates very well to a typical change drive, and this could be really any topic, but in a bit general terms, driving change requires us to understand that the different individuals that are involved, the different teammates that we have, who will all need to be part of the change for it to be successful, we need to understand them. We cannot underestimate the complexity of the human brain, the emotions that are involved, the different motivations that are involved, and incentives that we have to build to be able to drive this change. And the first thing that I recommend is almost like imagine gathering on one side of the river, which is where we are, a gathering of all the teammates or communicating in a particular way for them to truly understand why we need this change. What would happen if we don't embrace this change, and why it's important that we embrace it and take our organization forward. Or it could be various reasons. Our competition is going ahead and we'll be behind the competition if we don't change. Or it could be like we want to be the first movers, we want to be the first to launch a product. There could be heaps of reasons. Or maybe it's a cost-cutting drive, maybe you want to do something different. You want to make the organization culture change. There are lots of various change projects that may be required in your organization. But it's important for the whole team to understand whoever is going to get impacted as to why we are doing it. And that for me is like a gathering on one side of the riverbank and making people understand. A lot of listening is involved. The best of change managers or change leaders are great listeners, because unless you really listen and make the people feel that they are heard, they wouldn't be behind you, you wouldn't gain their trust. And to be a good change leader, that's the number one thing you need. You need people to trust you, and why should they come along? So a lot of listening is involved in this initial exercise, but at the end, your end goal is that everybody tries to understand why we need to embrace this change. Next step, start studying the people that are involved. And as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of different things that drive people. You would see people who may be interested to just let somebody else go ahead first. They would want to see enough people crossing the river in whatever route they take, but reaching there on the other side and almost like shouting from the other side to say, yeah, it's safe, everything's fine, and it's exactly what we had thought about. And that would give these people who are a bit risk averse, who are want to be sure that they go ahead. And you need to be aware that there will be people like that, and you cannot force them to be the first movers. On the other hand, there would be people who like to be a bit more adventurous. I see these characteristics coming in a lot of the millennials who actually like change. They don't like to sit around and be doing the same thing every day. So maybe those are your first movers. You find your initial change agents who are willing to take that risk, who are willing to maybe cross the river over rocks and or want to swim across and are not afraid to get a little wet in the process. They're okay to take a few bumps as they go along, but eventually go on the other side and tell everybody that it's safe. Some people may want to get carried as they cross the river, and or maybe hold hands with somebody. They don't want to go alone across this bridge as they go to the other side. So it's important to know the complexities of the various individuals involved. There's a lot of study required, there's a lot of planning required. There has to be a proper communications aspect to it, identifying which stakeholders need to be treated, how are we going to communicate, who do we have to engage more, who do we have to just keep an eye on and ensure that they would come along. And eventually it's also important to realize that while the task may suddenly look a very difficult one, you just need to get enough people across the river, and they would be the ones who do not want to be in the first 40, 50, 60% of the crowd. But as soon as that crowd becomes smaller and smaller on this side of the river bank, they would realize that they don't want to be left out, because the people who are risk averse also are afraid or rather do not want to take the risk of being left out. So once you've moved enough people on the other side towards the positivity of change, you would see them coming automatically, or maybe deciding that they don't want to be part of it and shouldn't have been part of it in the first place. But there's nothing, there's no right way to do this. There is no 100% guaranteed way to achieve a successful change project. It's almost like thinking on your feet, dealing with uncertainty. And these are the soft skills that change managers require to be able to deal with, firstly, their own emotions, because it is an emotional topic, change, but then be able to understand all the different players, how people are thinking, and be able to come together to drive this change. I almost use this other example of a tidal wave. A wave never builds up on like a flip of a switch, like you switch it on, the wave is on. It's always a gradual build-up from the ocean. The winds start coming together, and the weather has to be right, the conditions have to be right, and eventually it does become a wave, and that's something that how change is as well. And eventually you want to control how this wave builds up, and then eventually converts it into how you would want it at the end. So in summary, wanted to talk a little bit about change. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. Whoever is interested, please connect with me and share this with you further with your colleagues who could use this as well. And I would just love to engage. If you want to come into a conversation, a discussion, we could exchange notes and learn from each other. Thank you.